I mean, I think they're supposed to be professional, and the problem is, just so you know, with that stuff about my claim, I have a claim. It's actually a very sophisticated claim. And when Judge Ramirez read it, she tried to recount her perspective on it in a manner that is absolutely in violation of the standards that she is beholden to as a member of the bar. And insofar as they don't want to acknowledge me as a member of the bar, or even for the purposes of that one particular proceeding, it does not change the fact that she's a member of the bar and that Judge Godbey is a member of the bar, and hence they are held to those standards. And because they are held to those standards, in exercise as some sort of professional decorum, I'm not going to comment further on this. I was in the course of doing something and it was interrupted with an electronic transmission that is connected to acts of financial fraud. And part of the evidence of the fact that they're connected to acts of financial fraud is because I am trying to document my recounting and follow up to a report I filed on financial fraud. And they are trying to send me concurrently a confirmation of a transactional process that I also understand to be connected to a hedging strategy that has its benchmark today. So I'm going to follow, I'm going to continue with what I was doing, and I'm going to continue reading. Let's see, let me find, okay. As the criminal enterprise spread, it grew to engage in acts of labor and sex trafficking, as well as arms and drug trafficking, and even includes trafficking in people's genetic materials. With the concurrent relinquishment of procedural safeguards for people ensnared in this syndicate, it served to spread corruption throughout multiple levels of society and today represents a virtual epidemic of political and financial corruption in the United States. It is additionally seeking to expand its structure through contrived legislative changes. Despite appearances of factional differences, it is a consistent criminal enterprise with an ascertainable explicit and implicit structure. The modus operandi of the criminal enterprise is to use the abstract labor of U.S. citizens to test behavioral economics modalities in order to modify behavior with the aim of predicting and commanding consumption patterns. At more advanced levels, genetic testing, mental health assessments and treatments, including treatments using psychotropic medications or controlled substances, and alternative resource acquisition networks were instituted to program individuals into predetermined economic roles. Demographic and other personal data was used to develop targeted marketing that effectively employed the behavioral economics project to effectuate predictable consumption and spending patterns. By limiting access to financial resources, social programs were given leeway to develop experimental models that literally used the movements of people in the health and human services programs to, quote, wire, end quote, monies for accounts to which they had been assigned. These experiments were performed on people without their conscious knowledge and without their conscious consent. In the course of the experimentation, people were literally used to launder money for any number of operations and industries. People were told that they were accessing, quote, derivatives, end quote, of the actual process in the form of, quote, resources, end quote, that they needed for their survival. A great deal of the 2008 financial crisis was attributed to, quote, excessive exposure of banks' investment banking arms to derivatives and securities tied to U.S. home prices, end quote. But the collapse of the real estate market and the experience with, quote, derivatives, end quote, based on fixed assets merely set the stage for experimenting with new derivative processes using mobile and or abstract assets. Healthcare, especially mental health care, provided an excellent forum for this development. While a precedent for the accrual of this, quote, unlawful debt, quote, began decades ago, in the last 10 years it emerged and expanded through the implementation of several pieces of legislation that ostensibly aimed to assist with, quote, recovery, end quote, after the 2008 financial crisis. The primary pieces of legislation to be considered are Emergency Economic Stabilization Act of 2008, Mental Health Parity Act of 2008, Genetic Non-Discrimination Act of 2008, Spectrum Relocation Improvement Act of 2008. One of the most notable pieces of evidence in the current approval of these bills relates to how the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act of 2008 assists in redefining the concept of, quote, conflict of interest, end quote. It was the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act of 1999 that removed the prohibition on an individual serving on multiple boards of directors because it was a, quote, conflict of interest, quote, that had existed since 1933. This correlates with legal definitions of, quote, person, end quote, being about more than a biological human individual, but also entailing a corporation in consideration of, quote, person, end quote. It helps lay the foundation for one person to claim the human capital assets from many other persons that are linked into the network. Various aspects of the bill detail a process by which human capital linked to financial debt of individual persons is acquired so as to be apportioned to various creditors or persons. It paves the way for the infrastructure of making a person a mobile bank with accounts for various other persons. I'm going to stop because I'm on page 2. There's 6 more pages of this specific report. I'm going to say, at the time I wrote this, I was not aware of the reports that had been filed to or through or in connection with the hearings concerning the temporary asset relief program, or the reports that were provided, including the biographical contextualization for this by the former Special Inspector General of the TARP program. And I was also not aware of certain other specific line items that I found in various appropriations bills, including from 1993, 2003, and 2008. And this was prior to my more thorough attempts to report on and even file petitions with the Supreme Court of the United States regarding the 2018 Appropriations Act, or rather the House Concurrent Resolution that was the foundation for what later became the federal budget approved in 2017 for implementation in 2018. And that my analysis of that and my concerns around that was the first time I attempted to file a case with the Supreme Court of the United States through a specific petition. I believe the first petition I filed was a petition for certiorari. So I'm just saying that now so that you have a little bit of context. Everything I've just said and alleged at the time can be proven. My concern is that what happened is when I gave this report to that staffer, that staffer actually did let the senator know about it, and the senator co-conspired with other people both in the state of Texas and people that abused their authority by virtue of having access to things connected to the Department of Homeland Security, and took what was supposed to be a report and took what was supposed to potentially be charges that could be bought on a criminal proceeding and actually used it as a strategy. And in the course of using it as a strategy, they tried to frame me. And it would have been a lot different if they had acknowledged that I had already contacted the House Financial Services Committee and the Senate Banking Committee in March of 2016 with a request for a specific kind of investigation regarding what I understood to be abuse of power by a former Secretary of State.